Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. Welcome, everyone, to this regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee. Today's December 4th, 2017. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the committee, joined by my colleagues, Council Members Englander and Koretz, and we're ready to begin with today's agenda. Members, just for your information, for the sake of the public, we do have cards on all matters, but for the cards, I would have proposed items 1, 3, 8, 9, 11, and 12 through 18 for consent approval, unless you have questions or concerns about those matters. And we'll go ahead and take the general we'll take the multiple item public comment. You have an opportunity to look at those matters, and then we'll call them special if you see fit, and if not, we'll just go ahead and roll. So with that, we'll go, oh, and you know what, skip item 12, because we do also have a separate card on that matter as well, and I think at least one member had a question, so we'll keep that one for regular session as well. So let's go ahead next to the multi-item public comment. So we'll start with Mr. Spindler, followed by Mr. Herman, followed by Mr. Previn. 2 minutes for all agenda items.
All right. Big one today. I'm glad many of the top brass LAPD is number 2. Waukesha Wilson versus City of Los Angeles. We always say her name, Waukesha Wilson. Because Waukesha Wilson was taken into custody and murdered by LAPD personnel, and 22 minutes of the video inside the facility is missing. And we've been trying to wonder where that video is. Anybody here got that video? No, because it was erased. This is a murder cover-up. But what's going to happen today is what always happens in City Hall, and has since Chief Parker was chief in the 50s. You're going to pay off the family, you're going to pay off their attorney to go away and remain silent. Because you're going to make this confidential, you're going to go behind closed doors, and you're going to tell everybody nothing, and the only thing you're going to tell them is tomorrow on the council floor how much the settlement is. So I'm recommending a settlement of $7.4 million for this case. That would be $4 million for the loss of Waukesha Wilson's life or earning capacity, another $3 million for punitive damages to her family, especially her mother and her lovely grandmother. She left a child on this earth, and none of you guys on this panel give a complete and total fucking shit about anything, that you murdered a black woman who was waiting on a misdemeanor charge that was never even filed over in the criminal courts building. So they tried to lie and said that the coroner notified the DA's office, but when I went to the court the day after I found out she was killed after the holiday, she was never on the list because the coroner notified the court before they notified her own mother of this murder. You murderous motherfuckers.
Mr. Herman, followed by Mr. Previn.
So in regards to the murderous motherfuckers for $7.4 million of earnings, loss of punitive damage, and emotional distress under Waukesha Wilson. Say her name, Waukesha Wilson! And so, you see, folks, this is the reality of Los Angeles. Let's go to item 6 regarding what? Another plaintiff subjected to disability discrimination like myself. I just filed today with Roy Ball Allard a DOJ complaint in discrimination by Paul Krikorian, for the record, in regards to my disability and my non-disability and my invisible disability, motherfucker. Then I go into item number 7 regarding medical retaliation and alleged discrimination. What do you mean medical? Yeah, this poor fucking person was taken out of their job in order to leave because of a medical condition like mine, you stupid motherfuckers. Then I go into item number 9, extension for outside counsel. Well, I got recommendations. Let's ask for a pre-outside settlement for Wayne Spindler so not to cost the city of Los Angeles $7.4 million in fucked up damages, you stupid motherfuckers. I'm sick and tired of outside counsel. All the friends of Paul Krikorian being paid up to $800 to $1,000 to settle cases for outside counsel is ridiculous. How the fuck do we let Armenian people come into this world and take advantage of your tax-paying dollars for funding and term extensions for outside counsel? Section 54956.9 D1. Let's pay off Wayne Spiller and get him the fuck out of L.A. so he can sit in his boat and I can come back and talk about extensions for outside counsel relative to the physical impact statement none submitted.
Cut him off, he's done. Mr. Previn.
Thank you. My name is Eric Previn, and I'm from Studio City. Here in Budget Finance Committee meeting. The Waukesha Wilson story is obviously a heartbreaker. When somebody dies in custody at the county or the city, it's cause for great concern. I also noted that there was a 20-minute lapse in that video. Somehow, I'm sure there's some explanation, but this is another reason why the public would like to have access to your deliberations on these matters, because obviously it's critically important. And the cover-up component of legal cases, the way they're adjudicated here in our city with these closed session meetings where everything's done over there and then the settlement is announced, is problematic, as we know. So hopefully we can get more information and find a way to minimize that kind of thing from happening ever again. Obviously, item number 9 is, once again, we're refreshing the outside counsel team, including, if I'm not mistaken, Pepper Hamilton. Now, Pepper Hamilton's getting a substantial uptick of $575,000, Mr. Kritz. Now, I know when you hear $575,000, your mind goes directly where mine goes, which is, wow, why are they getting so much money? And I think that this is in connection with the Mei Ling matter, but we don't know. That's where the U.S. Attorney has joined a lawsuit against the city for ADA issues. I'm not sure. But we would like to know. I think it's important. And Ogletree, our friends at Ogletree, are also getting a $100,000 uptick, but they're also identified on the conflict item, which I believe is an item number 14. So that's a little bit weird, like push me, pull you. You know, like we have some conflicts with them, but on the other hand, let's give them a little more money because what's the difference? I don't like that feeling so much. Item number 16 is the Fox refund. I know Englander is excited about this, as is Mr. Buscaino, who signed the matter. When we give Fox an $89,000 refund, it sends a strange signal to everybody. Why did they overpay? And are these overpayments consistent? Do I get a general
Thank
public
you, Mr.
comment?
Previn. No, that'll come later. All right, members, so that that completes public comment on the items that I indicated as consent matters, as well as all of the closed session items. So public comment on all of those matters is closed. We will take up item 12 and item 10 in a bit, but are there any other matters that you would wish to take off of the consent recommendations, members? All right, seeing none, then item number 1, it will be the recommendation of the committee to approve the city attorney's recommendations. Same with item 3, item 8, item 9, it will be the recommendation of the committee to approve the item. Item 11, it will be the recommendation of the committee to approve the item. Item 13, 14, those items, it will also be the action of the committee to approve the item. Item 15, it will be the action of the committee to note and file. Items 16, 17, and 18, it will be the action of the committee to approve those items. That then takes us into closed session.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
excuse me. And for the record, for item number 13, the Information Technology and General Services Committee took an action. Will this committee be concurring with?
Yes, we'll be concurring in the action of that committee. And so that takes us next to closed session. City Attorney, have any recommendation for preference? If not, we'll begin with. Number 10, right? Yeah, we'll begin with item number 2. We're back in open session, and we will proceed with item number 10.
Item number 10 is the City Administrative Officer and Department of Cannabis Regulation to report on staffing and budget needs for the Department of Cannabis Regulation. CAO, City Attorney, and LAPD to report on staffing and budget needs for the LAPD and City Attorney for an April 1, 2018 surge of enforcement.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Claudia Aguilar with the CAO's office. This office was asked to report back on the staffing and budgeting needs for the Department of Cannabis and the Los Angeles Police and City Attorney in regards to enforcement of illegal cannabis businesses. The Department of Finance, City Attorney, and Cannabis Regulation have received a number of interim position authorities to assist with the administration of the application process for the Prop D businesses. This office has been working with the Department of Cannabis Regulation, Fire, and Police Department on the resources required for pre-licensing inspections and the enforcement of illegal cannabis businesses. However, as the rules and regulations have not been adopted, this office is not prepared to recommend additional resources at this time. Once the rules and regulations are adopted and the final determination of criteria for eligible businesses that will receive priority processing is developed, we will continue and assist the departments in identifying the appropriate resources for deployment of resources. As part of the 2018-19 budget process, this office has received a number of cannabis-related budget requests. These requests will be reviewed as part of the annual review budget process. However, this office will report back on the resources necessary for pre-licensing inspections, both with Fire and the Cannabis Department, and enforcement against unlicensed commercial activity. And we'll continue to work with the affected departments. I have with me Kat Packard and also members from Police and Fire to answer any questions on individual department needs.
Okay. There were, the Rules Committee also made additional recommendations today?
Yes, the Rules Committee, the report before you also includes a number of fees related to cannabis. Right now, we've recommended the actual inspection. So Council had previously approved the inspection, the cost for applications. We've gone ahead and now added an inspection fee for Fire to be able to go and do the pre-licensing inspections, which is at $918 for a minimum 4-hour session. Because at this point, we're not sure how long these inspections will take. We've left it open that additional hours will also incur a charge at the inspector rate of $216 an hour. We've also included an appeal fee for the $4,687. However, this morning, Councilmember Weezar introduced a motion to change that amount to $100 for non-applicant fees. And at this point, we don't know the fiscal impact of that, but based on what we know for planning and other departments, it could be as much as $2 or $3 million in a general revenue, general fund hit once those costs are factored in. And the third item, we also put in for $1,700 for modifying the application, the business. So we have those fees in. We've also requested council to approve fines at a different level. So we have a minor, moderate, and major violation, and those were established based on the fees and other processes as well. So for a minor conviction, minor violation, the amount is equal to 50% of the cannabis fee, and it goes up to as high as 300% for a major violation. So this morning, as I mentioned, the Rules Committee did approve these fees with the amendment to a non-applicant fee, reducing that amount to $100.
So the concern that I have about the beginning of your comments is, I shouldn't say concern, but understandably, we can't have a comprehensive cost analysis yet. Mr. Spindler, sit down. If you're going to keep walking around in this meeting, I'm going to ask you to leave. Sit down. You're done. You're done with public comment. You don't need to fill out any more cards. Sit down. It's understandable that you can't really get a gauge on the cost until the policy is done, but on the other hand, I don't think it's responsible for us to approve a policy when we don't know what the cost of that policy is, especially when it's changing constantly with regard to fee waivers and other things that have dollars and cents impacts on the general fund. So we're trying to decide whether the cart or the horse comes first here, and we kind of need to do both at once. So is it realistic, Ms. Packer, if we, because we don't have a lot of time left here to make these judgments, by next week, do you think you would be prepared to be able to put forth a more detailed budget and plan for your hiring needs and for LAPD's enforcement needs and the other departmental costs that are likely to incur with the policy as we know it to be now? And then as we go forward, if there are modifications to that policy, I think any modification needs to be accompanied by a cost estimate of what that modification will do to costs and to revenues. Is that a realistic approach to be able to take?
Cat Packer, Department of Cannabis Regulation, I think that we can do kind of all that we can do based on the policy recommendations that have been put forth thus far. Of course, as these policies get passed and forth, a lot of the different responsibilities have changed over the course of time, particularly even within the last month or so. The department has, as a part of the city's normal process, submitted its budget request for the following year. But of course, we know that there are responsibilities that are going to be expected of the department that are going to come way before July of next year. That being said, I do think that it's the department's intention to be able to, as quickly as possible, put forward for this committee and for full city council a better estimate of what the department itself will need. And I think it's also important to add that when we're having these comprehensive conversations, that we can't just focus on the department's needs. We have to have conversations with LAPD, with the fire department, with building and safety, and a lot of the policies themselves are on the books, but the responsibilities have not been spelled out as who is to do what. And I think that that's part of the MOU process that we are trying to work on as well. But yes, it is our intention to be able to come back immediately and try to provide as much information as possible with the information that we have based on the policy recommendations to date.
And in a sense, your department is probably the easiest part of the equation. It's the other departments that we still haven't figured out who's primarily responsible for what aspect of implementation of the regulations and enforcement and so on, that's where I'm concerned that there could be real runaway costs that aren't captured perhaps with full recovery by the fees. And we just don't know that yet. So my only point is, I mean, I want us to move forward and instruct you with all deliberate haste to bring that report back. But I just want to make clear my concern that moving forward on a policy that doesn't have that cost estimate and revenue estimate, in pretty good shape before we do, would be greatly concerning to me because of the risk involved to the general fund. So, members, Mr. Kretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions. One, can you give us the current description of how this is going to roll out? Because I think since the original three-phase idea was first put into place, it might have gotten a little more complicated. So I wonder if you could tell us exactly how that's going to work as we envision it now.
In particular, around the phases of licensing that the department will be issuing?
Yes.
So the first phase will be for Prop M, Prop D priority applicants. These are businesses who have been in business since 2007. That licensing or provisional licensing will start at the discretion of the department, essentially to make sure that we're ready before we hit that go live button. The Prop D and Prop M group should be no more than around 200 applicants. Those individuals will have 60 days to apply. That 60-day window is mandated by Measure M. The second phase also would start at the discretion of the department to make sure that we were ready for our go live. The way that the policy currently reads, these folks would have until April 1st to submit their application. This is for businesses who are already in operation to try and bring them out of the shadows. There are a number of different criteria that these businesses would have to meet before they were even able to receive that provisional license, namely the department being able to determine that their application was complete and them undergoing a pre-licensing inspection in which other departments within the city would have to give sign-off on. The third phase of licensing would start at the discretion of the department, but because of the first two phases is likely to start April 1st or immediately after April 1st would be for everyone else. And this, with the proposed social equity program, this would be the time that the social equity program started as well. So 3 phases of licensing, one starting potentially in late December, trying to get Prop D folks, and essentially what the Prop D folks would go through is they would trade in their limited immunity that they currently have right now for a provisional license. It would almost be immediate. And then for these other operators, they would need to go through and have a complete application review and a pre-licensing inspection before they even got their provisional license. For these Prop D operators, they're still going to have to go through that application review process and pre-licensing inspection, but it's going to happen after they receive their provisional license.
Okay, and it seems like there are a lot of costs for prospective dispensaries. Could add up to, it looks like $15,000 or even more. How will that impact the social equity folks that are already going to have to pay for leasing and equipment and a lot of other expenses? Will those expenses added to it have a chance to knock people out and keep them from entering the whole process?
So the cost relative to licensing should be around or less than $11,000 per license activity per premise that these businesses are to be engaged in. But you're absolutely correct. There are many more costs to participating in this industry than just the licensing fees. That being said, under the current proposed social equity program, it put forth and considers fee deferrals so that businesses who would qualify for the social equity program, and there have been changes to these tiers, but for particular those businesses who would be traditionally considered social equity applicants, those fees would be deferred as currently proposed in the social equity program.
So we'd have some way to amortize them and have them pay over time, presumably.
Correct.
Okay, well, that's good. That's a reassuring answer to that one. And lastly, the appeals process and the extra as much as $3 million cost added to it. What's the justification for us going with that much more expensive to the city appeals process?
That was an amendment that was just put forward today. We have not had a chance to report back on it, but those fees and like for planning, it's really to not make it cost prohibitive for people to appeal these decisions. So it's completely a policy decision that your body gets to make whether or not you make that change.
I mean, that dollar amount sounds so low that I would assume that every single dispensary and facility gets appealed. So one would hope that that kind of massive dollar amount could actually be more than $3 million if you make that assumption.
That's just the non-applicant appeal. Not for the applicants would still pay the $4,687. This is just for the non-applicants.
Right, it's for neighbors.
Yes.
But
okay.
if we're assuming that we're encouraging an appeal at every single location, which at that dollar amount is likely, I'm not sure that we're taking into account the actual cost of doing an appeal at every single location within the city of Los Angeles. So I'm not sure we want to drop it to that low a level, and also not sure that we want to maintain the assumptions that would get us to only that dollar amount. I think it potentially could be much higher if you take into account that every location of every marijuana business might be appealed.
That's correct. That number was, like I said, it was just what in the past what we've seen with planning. Obviously, if we have thousands of locations, that number could get much higher, and it would be a cost borne by the general fund.
So do we have to vote on that as part of this package today when there hasn't been any real analysis of it?
I don't know if the amendment came forward as part of this report, but that's the amendment that was made this morning in Rules Committee.
So I guess maybe that's more a question for the chair. Is that before us or is it not before us?
I don't have the Rules Committee report here. Do we have?
No, Mr. Chair, we do not have the Rules Committee.
I got a verbal report, but I don't know that that's very, so we don't have the written reports. Probably hasn't even been compiled yet. They haven't completed writing their written report yet. So we heard what you've heard about that. So what's contained in their ultimate report. Have their recommendation, but not
I'd certainly encourage that we get much more analysis of that issue before we actually have to vote.
So the recommendation of the Rules Committee was to adopt the CAO report and the city attorney report and draft ordinance as amended and instruct the CAO to report to the Budget and Finance Committee on December 11th with a fully detailed budget and staffing plan for DCR. The problem is as amended because we don't have before us what has been amended. So I think where I want to go with this to try to simplify matters is if this committee's of a mind to advance the matter, we would instruct those reports to come back on December 11th to this committee. We could approve the CAO report, the city attorney report, and the draft ordinance subject to consideration of those reports on December 11th.
Pardon me, Mr.
Yes.
Chair, the ordinance, the city attorney report and the ordinance is not before the committee, only the CAO report.
Okay, so the city attorney has opined that we only need to consider the CAO report and the city attorney report and not the ordinance at this time with this vote.
Pardon me, on the Richard Williams City Clerk's office, on the file at this current time is a city attorney report and a draft ordinance. That is not referred to the Budget and Finance Committee. Only the CAO's report dated December 1st is being referred to the Budget and Finance Committee.
Okay, I'm not sure the Rules Committee understood it that way, but if that's the case, that I think should put us all at ease because we can move forward without making a final recommendation on the ordinance itself.
I'm not following that because isn't this coming before us on Wednesday?
Yes.
So if we don't speak to this question of the appeal fee, we will be voting on the appeal fee as amended by the Rules Committee today.
The ordinance as amended by the Rules Committee, but yes, and the fee schedule as well.
So we have the option now to weigh in on that to either say we want to go with that $100 number or
Sure, absolutely.
higher, keep the number that's in here or ask for some other sort of process.
We absolutely can do all of those things.
But if we don't, the default is what Rules Committee did.
Yeah, my concern was more that we would have to move forward with a recommendation on the underlying ordinance itself without fully appreciating the cost aspects of it.
Which is what we're going to have to do.
On Wednesday, but not here.
So can you hold the amendment in committee and approve the rest of it?
Is the ordinance, can the ordinance advance without the fee schedule?
Right now, the fee schedule is a separate ordinance, so the ordinance there will be separate ordinances for the fees and for the rules and regs. But the rules and regs will reference the eventual ordinance that gets approved.
Mm-hmm.
So they are connected, but they're not the same piece.
So council could consider the underlying policy ordinance on Wednesday, and we could hold the fee schedule ordinance until we get a full report, and we could approve that after the policy ordinance. Am I understanding that right?
Well, we need the fees approved, otherwise we won't be able to open up the applications without the fees.
No, I understand. But I mean, we're talking about a matter of days here or there. But so just let me walk this through and tell me if this makes sense. We instruct the CAO to report back next week to this committee with the full detailed budget and staffing plan and so forth. We approve the CAO report and the city attorney report and advance those to council. We do not need to approve the draft ordinance, as that is not before us for consideration today. Mr. Williams, correct?
Correct, and neither
Okay.
is the city attorney report.
The city attorney report is not either, okay?
No.
All right, so just the CAO's report. Council votes Wednesday on the policy ordinance. The fee ordinance could be referred back to Budget Committee for further consideration based on our fully detailed budget and staffing report that we'll get on the 11th. Can that work? Does that chronology work?
Then the council is voting without the benefit of knowing the fees.
Yes, and that's sort of a fundamental structural challenge with this entire process, but yes. Now, one could argue that since the fee schedule ordinance would be kind of like the trailer bill coming afterwards, we could adjust those fees to whatever is necessary for full cost recovery. So you could approve the policy, and then lo and behold, the fees could quintuple after we're done with our analysis, and that's just the way it's going to have to go. Right?
Yes.
And I actually think that might be appropriate, considering if we are considering what the budget, what the department staffing resources are. If it's going to be full cost recovery, those two conversations about what the staffing resources are and those fees are very much interrelated. And so you might want to have both of those in front of you at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we do lower the fee on the appeals, we may have to raise the others.
Have to get that money someplace. Mr. Engler, you want to weigh in on this?
I do.
I could tell that you have that I want to weigh in postured.
Waiting. No, good discussion. Wayne, if you disrupt this meeting again, I'm not going to wait for the chair. I'll remove you. So just one more word. You've been completely disruptive since you walked in here with your radio, and and keep disrupting the people behind you from being able to participate as well. With that, thank you very much. A couple of things. I think, first of all, we're probably, I sort of had the idea that that's where we'd end up when we walked in. There's absolutely no way to come up with a cost recovery fee schedule not knowing what we're going to pass in terms of a policy. So a couple questions that I have as it relates to that is, are we anticipating dedicated staff for this purpose?
I'm sorry, which purpose? The application?
Inspections, everything from review, inspections, both fire, enforcement. Will there be dedicated staff for that purpose?
Yes, that is anticipated that, the department itself will be responsible for application review, coordinating pre-licensing inspections among other departments. But as it's currently situated, the department itself is intended to have pre-licensing on-site inspection responsibilities as well, in addition to what we can call compliance enforcement or compliance monitoring inspectors that will have to be able to go out on a regular basis and respond to community complaints, to go out and inspect if there are any anomalies or irregularities that get brought up in our track and trace system once that gets brought on board. So we will need dedicated staff in order to be able to.
Are these staff going to be deputized, or the point where they can actually write citations?
I think that part of the conversation and what the challenge has been thus far is trying to figure out what classification exists within the city that would be best suited to handle these responsibilities, whether or not that needs to be a sworn police officer, whether or not this can be a civilian who does these responsibilities, whether it can be a tax compliance officer that gets retrained to do other duties. And I think that this conversation is a conversation that we very quickly need to have. There have been suggestions, and we have recommended within our budget request, within the department's budget request, one thing, but I don't think as a policy decision there has been a determination of who should serve certain functions of inspections within the city, and necessarily what that looks like moving forward.
And beyond conversations, are you looking to move towards a written manual and policy as this rolls out for all of those functions? And the frequency, the expertise at each level. For example, I was going to ask how often some of these inspections, whether they're fire, life, safety, compliance certifications, are done at what rate and how often. So are you going towards an actual written departmental policy that's going to have all of this framework spelled out?
I think ultimately that's exactly what the department is going to have to do. I think that part of the conversation that's happening within the city is also happening at the state level, because we're sharing regulatory responsibilities with the state. And there are some instances where we don't necessarily need to be duplicative.
Will the state have an enforcement and inspection umbrella?
They should. But the problem is that these are all new functions for the state as well, and so I don't necessarily believe that they have dedicated subject matter expertise at this point. Just as the department is trying to staff up its resources, I know that across the state, the 3 various licensing and regulatory agencies are staffing up their resources. And to be completely honest, I think that 2018 is going to be a challenge for anyone involved in regulation.
So in that, though, I would say the default is that we're sort of on our own, that whatever
Correct.
enforcement, inspections, certifications, compliance issues, we should make sure that whatever model we put forth, we have no reliance on the state whatsoever, right?
I agree.
Okay, so with that, knowing that we're going to be we will have then dedicated staff, and knowing the conversation of what came out of the committee this morning, for example, they're going to be capping out at a different rate for retail versus micro, and micro, if it has a retail license, will take away from the retail. So the net result will be less license in certain classifications, which means the license cost will go up even, quite frankly, probably close to double what we're looking at today. Realistically, it has to, because this was based on the previous framework, right? Which is fine, but I just want to recognize that. I don't know if the committee had tuned in on that as well. But I don't know if there's other, in terms of coming back here and looking at other areas for cost recovery. This is also going to touch the planning department. Every one of these do we have a cost recovery component built into the fee from, have we done a full analysis of every department this is going to cover?
Right now, planning did not ask for any additional resources.
Okay, that's my concern.
The initial fee that we set forward was actually based on the Prop D businesses.
Sure.
And it's something that we've always known we're going to have to come back with and see if those fees are actually recovering the costs. So it's an ongoing process, and we fully anticipate that these fees will change as we move along.
Well, yeah.
But that's something that we are definitely keeping our eye on.
So what I would ask is if we can add something to this moving forward so we can codify it somewhere, that all departments who touch a piece of this, and a lot of it is land use and a lot of it's enforcement, right? But a lot of the zoning requirements are going to be very land use specific and heavy. That we should do an analysis and ask the CAO to do an analysis of any department that will touch this and sort of an anticipated cost from those departments be captured, to make sure that, like planning, you're saying they're not asking. But I'm telling you right now, they're going to spend we all know they're going to spend a lot of time. They already have, but they're going to spend a great deal of time.
Well, our system that we're developing actually will be interacting with ZEMA, so a lot of these questions will be done at the systems level. So Ms. Packard's staff will require the assistance of planning, but they will be taking on a lot of that responsibility. At this point, we obviously don't know how that's going to pencil out or not, but we are mindful that at this point, we're not fully aware. And like I said, we did get a number of requests in the budget, and we're looking at making, one request and to review all of these asks from all the different departments.
Sure.
Because, don't want to reveal budget requests right now, but prior to the release, but we did get requests from a number of departments to continue interim positions as well as new resources, including police and fire. So we are looking at all those costs together to make sure they actually match the groups that are going forward, because it seems like we're pretty close on the final regs, and now we know what these universes are going to start to look like, and we can start to deploy resources based on the actual numbers.
Yeah, and just to be clear, because Mr. Englander's point was kind of what I would have assumed would already be encompassed in a CAO's report back, but maybe it isn't, and especially with the discussion about budget requests, just so that from my perspective, whether a department has made a budget request for this funding or not, we still need to know what the cost of this enforcement and regulatory regimen is going to be, because I want that money. And even if it's for current positions that are currently budgeted and filled, if their service is going to be diverted from what they're doing now to do cannabis-related work, the cannabis industry is going to pay for that, from my perspective. Not my
That's sort of where I was
constituents,
going with
not
this.
services, nothing else. So whether they've made a request or not, I'm only speaking for myself here, but this has to be absolutely full recovery of all related costs, and from every department, whether they're for currently funded positions or not. And only the CAO can really develop what that.
That's exactly where I was
impact would
going
be.
with it. And because I've heard that some departments have said, we can cover, and the personnel have been able to cover the work done thus far. But we have always gone in eyes wide open that this was going to be full cost recovery, and it needs to be. And exactly, not waiting for the budget to come out. I think that would be a mistake. And so looking, at least we should have the net cast before we get the fees back, so we know we're casting a wide net to ensure we're capturing all of the time. And again, and I think as the chair stated, it's not if we have, whether they're dedicated staff or not, if it's current staff that are doing other things, but they're also pulled away to work on this, that's cost recovery as well, and it needs to be included.
Can I clarify? Those are two separate discussions. What I meant was actual additional resources. We are definitely recovering the cost of all the departments attached. It's just whether they're asking for specific resources just to do this enforcement.
Great.
So.
We just want all of that.
Yes.
And just to be clear on the cost recovery, some of it's coming through the fees, but some of it's also coming through the tax. Is that right? And when we talk about full cost recovery, how much of it are we assuming from fees, and how much of it are we assuming from the 5% and 10% on medical and recreational?
Right now, we are not counting any of the revenue from the tax. We are solely basing this on the actual application fees.
Right. And obviously we want as much as we can as the fees, but I think realistically, if we're talking about every department that's touched by this, including enforcement, we've also been talking about some of the money from the tax to help get us more cops to do more of this enforcement. And I agree with my colleagues, we need to have a real accounting of where that's, I don't think the fees are going to cover all those costs. It's just, I don't see it. But
Well, they should.
Yeah,
I don't
absolutely
see that there's
they
any
should.
reason
when you talk
they
about
don't.
the increased enforcement with police,
Oh, absolutely.
you don't think some of that's going to end up coming from the tax?
No, I don't think that. Then it's supplemented. So I don't think so at all. But
I think it'd
Well-
be great if it all comes from the fee. The main thing is that we account for it all, because I think also what's happening is everybody has spent the tax money 6 times over in their minds, not, on whether it's on community benefits or whether it's on enforcement or whether it's on all these. I hear everybody spending the money, including talking about enforcement fees, enforcement money. And then we're saying today that we're gonna handle all the enforcement through the different fees. And
Well,
the
look,
fees are just one-time money that's,
So, members, I don't want to go too far into this discussion because that's more of a budgetary discussion that we can have after we get the report. Obviously, a tax is general fund revenue.
Absolutely.
And it's not, it can't be earmarked to anything.
Absolutely.
Or else, it would be treated differently. And so it's entirely within our discretion to spend that tax money however we see fit and on anything that we feel that is necessary to be spent on. So, but I think I don't want to get too deep into that discussion until we have the report back from the CAO about costs and potential revenues. Let me just make sure Mr. Are you done, Mr. England?
No, not yet.
Okay, Mr. Kretz to follow up on that point, and then we'll go back to Mr. England.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on the planning especially. The planning department is dramatically behind a number of areas, especially HPOZ enforcement. I could give you 5 or 10 other areas. So the fact that they would say, we can do it within existing resources, they can get further and further backlogged on all kinds of things that would be a negative for the city. So we clearly don't want to let anyone get away with just saying, we'll do it. They may be trying to be good team players, but it's not in the city's interest to underfund some of those departments.
Well, and on that, Mr. Koretz, I would actually say that most of the agencies outside of the new department that touch this are our core function agencies that are all spread thin. LAPD, Building and Safety, and Planning. I mean, if you had to say who are the top,
And fire.
5 or 6 and fire. I mean, the 5 or 6 most important critical top agencies in the city, they're all the ones that actually touch this and are already spread thin on a lot of issues. And that's why this cost recovery element for me is so important. So we don't deplete and detract from our core functions. If they weren't core function services, it wouldn't maybe be as much of an issue if people were actually sitting around looking for things to do. But these aren't those folks. One of the questions I also had was on, and I know it was already asked about who's going to be doing what. So that I think would be great to see. But there's supposed to be a safety and a security plan created and implemented and drafted and submitted by each operator. Who reviews that? Do we have is that part of we got to figure out who's doing what yet?
I do think that's something that's a part of the who's doing what.
Okay.
As it relates to the security plan, there are a couple of things. There's an alarm permit, there's the security personnel, there's a review of the premises diagram that
Right. The
details
videos,
their- Exactly.
Right. Locking mechanism, sure.
Now, the department currently doesn't have the capacity nor subject matter expertise to carry out those functions for all of the facilities that are coming down the pipeline.
Right.
I've been talking to LAPD about trying to figure out where that subject matter expertise within the city lies, but I do think that it's important to bring it up right now because that's
is.
going to
It's
hold
gonna be
the
it.
system up if folks.
And
are
it also
able to-
changes the cost structure and who's doing the work. You can't just say LAPD has a fixed price because it just depends on who, what, where. And that goes back to, I think, a conversation you and I had some time ago, which was the possibility of looking at CID to take some of this over. Has there been any follow-up discussion on that at all?
I think that there are lots of conversations that still need to happen, particularly as it relates to in enforcement. And I think that we can kind of parse out compliance enforcement and criminal enforcement.
Right.
But particularly as it relates to this to these inspections, I will be completely honest. DCR does not have the capacity nor subject matter expertise.
Sure. But I go
at
back to
time.
this. Has there been a follow-up conversation with the compliance element with CID at all?
No, not at this point. I think that CID. And I don't want to speak for CID, so I'll
Well, we got LAPD here. Want to speak for CID?
Thank you. Steve Cremona, the CEO of Gang and Narcotics. I can't really speak for CID, but I can say that, having been in the room, Mr. Tiefenk did offer to assist for 6 months with the personnel that would be hired by the cannabis department. And as far as the police department is only going to be involved in the enforcement of retailers that have significant criminal activity, and is not going to be involved in the administrative issues when we don't have the personnel to be involved in administrative issues, nor do we have or do we ever do inspections of any security plans.
Well, CID does, from my understanding. So we have, under Commission Investigation Division, which is a specialized unit within the Police Commission of the LAPD, there are approximately 42 different types of licenses for businesses. They're from all the way from parking, as it relates to valet, as it relates to nightclubs, massage parlors. They go through the various checklists and go out and do inspections of whether each one of those classifications are following the administrative rules under that classification. For example, massage parlors in Los Angeles cannot have their front windows covered. They can't have a separate door that locks to the back. Those are rules and regulations we passed here in Los Angeles. So who enforces that? Well, it's not building and safety. It's actually CID. They're an umbrella, and I'm not sure why there's some reluctance, because I've been talking about it for months. So if it's a firm no, they don't want to do it, great, I'll move on. But I haven't gotten that either. I was told originally when I brought this conversation up to CID that they really don't want to be the arm to inspect, and the reason why is because they stated, and I quote, marijuana is not legal under the federal law. Well, okay, those conversations are long gone. We are beyond that. Horse is left. But January 1st is a whole new world here. And I think it's, to me, and my response to them then was, well, first of all, that's selective enforcement. Let's not go down that road. The bottom line is it's legalized here in California. We're making rules and regulations to not only legalize but to tax it here in Los Angeles, and creating a department to do so. CID or whoever that responsible party needs to be at the table. So we have an agency that does that. I understand, and in the opening statement was from that, the response on that question was, well, they don't have the staff. Well, that's why we're having these conversations are critical now, so we can hire that staff. And it's fully cost recovery. So if we have somebody who actually has 42, I think it's 42, different categories of specialized businesses that they have the rules and regulations and the oversight, and including security plans, including on-site visits for those things. And not so we don't have to pull, it wouldn't be drug enforcement. So drug enforcement sitting here, but that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about regulating rules for an establishment, commercial establishment, and it should be whoever from LAPD does that, which is CID is the only one, or commercial crimes, but it's not a crime, and building and safety. And so I'm trying to scratch my head with, as we're moving forward with coming up with the cost and staffing up, those are conversations that I've been talking about for months, and that's important. This is the most important element in this. It's not the dollars we're talking about here today. It's not what are the total dollars for fee recovery. It's going to be the first phone calls that we're going to get, and we're going to get them often, are all the illegal, unlicensed operators or the ones that are not in compliance, period. We'll have nobody to call, nobody to respond, because we're staffing up and trying to bring in those expertise. I get that. But we do have departments that have specialized functions that do that now, and that's not part of the conversation, and there's a certain cost to go with that. And unless it's a conversation later, I think it's going to be too late. It should be the conversations taking place now, because we're about to pull the trigger on the ordinances. I realize there's a lot going on. I couldn't imagine. It's much easier for us to sit on this side of the table and ask questions than sit on that side of the table and answer the unknown, because we are going down a path we've never done before, the size of a scale and a scope that we can't even fathom. So I really do appreciate and understand where you're all coming from on this. But from where I'm at is probably one of the most important elements, and a lot of us have a lot of different things that are really important to them. For me, as the chair of public safety, for me, the most important is the public safety element. The health and safety of the communities, not just the operators, but the surroundings around those establishments are really, really important. Looking at the micro businesses is a whole other conversation, because now you've got an entity, a facility, a business that has at a minimum, three different types of licenses, if not four, from distribution, manufacturing, cultivation, retail. Like, wow, who's going to be those are fascinating. One-stop shop. But so for me, that part of it, and this really does go back into the conversation we're having, because we have to build up into what those fees are to cover whom, yet we haven't had discussions yet on, forget creating a position. We actually have expertise in the city that we should be using, and I appreciate CID has said they're willing to take it on for the first 6 months. It should be there, I think, and unless I'm told otherwise, why it's not a good idea or there's a better idea out there. We're going to about to hit this thing, hit that pavement in January, and even in tranches as we start phasing it in without having that staff. So anyway, I think I've said enough, but that's where I'm coming from on this.
And I think the answer to that really has to come from Mr. Tiefenk for a definitive
But it
answer.
doesn't. It can come from us, too. I mean, I absolutely disagree. Mm-hmm. First of all, let me say this. No. Let me say this. I love Richard Tiefenk. By far the best executive director of the commission we've ever had. He's a dear friend and comes to every single committee. He's incredibly responsive. We talk at night, on weekends. I think he's doing a great job. This is a policy decision by the City of Los Angeles, by the elected officials that are actually operating this. And I've asked for, not only repeatedly, but in my own committee, for them to report back on CID. And the only response I've gotten back is, well, you don't really want the police department, particularly CID. We don't want it because it's not a legal substance in terms of what the federal law says, which is an insane answer. And so it's really up to us, I think, to instruct who we want to do it. And I'm willing to go down that path, but because I haven't heard, I'd like to do this. Entertain the thought, and part of this coming back here is until we have set staff for enforcement and they've been identified, report back on cost recovery for CID to fulfill that role, and delineate, list out what they can do. Until we have it set and established and who's going to be doing the security and the enforcement, because at least it gets us, because right now we just don't know. So we're moving forward of a policy that we don't know, so we can at least have that discussion.
So on that particular aspect of costs, it would probably be helpful to have in the Cio report a comparison of the options that we have for that enforcement function. Right. So it would include, potentially at least temporarily utilizing existing personnel in CID. It could include hiring civilian enforcers within DCR. It could include hiring up a special building and safety unit. It could include other options. We don't know where that's going to fall yet. But part of this is a cost decision, cost effectiveness
right,
decision.
Right, that's part of it. The other part is, and Kat, you haven't had the luxury of getting approval for personnel, for bodies to hire, and then waiting. So you'll experience that along with the rest of us shortly. So you'll love the fact that we're about to give you so much funding to hire so many people, but then you'll be back here explaining why you haven't hired them yet, because you can't get them through personnel or you can't get them through the various, because you're competing with every other department. No, you'll be back. Trust me. And if it's not here publicly, it'll be privately telling all of us while you're banging your head against the wall that you don't have the staff, but you have the funding. We'll have those conversations. But we do have staff in other departments you're going to have to utilize until that does ramp up. And that's why I look to these other ones, particularly those like CID. They're going to be critically important, at least even the first year at a minimum.
Mr. Blumenfield, anything else? Anything else that any of you would like to offer at this point? We do have one member of the public who submitted a card. I want to call up Jeff McConnell to speak. 1 minute.
Thank you. Council members, Jeff McConnell, England or Canavian Island, we represent UCBA, which represents a number of property dispensaries here in Los Angeles. Obviously, fee setting is a bit of an art and a science, and I encourage you to have faith in the CAO's office that they will get it right over time. even when we set fees for planning department, not all cases are exactly the same. They don't all take the same amount of time, and this will get fixed as we move forward. And we know that the city will follow the law and set the fee appropriately to recoup their expenses, to process applications and perform compliance functions. But I would caution you to remember that this money is not being, they're not fees collected for enforcement. Enforcement is the responsibility of the city, and it's the reason why at UCBA we supported such high taxes of cannabis to pay for enforcement of illegal cannabis activity. And this is a bit of a chicken and egg. We need LAPD to get out there and enforce against illegal businesses, or the city will not get the taxation that it's looking for, because business will be diverted to other places.
Thank you very much. Okay, anything else, members? Okay. So
I have
then,
one thing.
What,
We do have
yes.
a plan for that. We have a proposal and a plan for the enforcement aspect.
Okay, very good. And there's really at least two different distinct categories of enforcement here, and I think Mr. Englander kind of pointed this up. One is illegal operators, you know, people trying to evade the system and so on. That's an ordinary law enforcement kind of issue. But there's also whether there's compliance with our licensure requirements, and that's a little different. It's a different category of enforcement that we do in other contexts all the time. So, yeah, Mr.
One more
Blumenfield.
thought. I was thinking about the appeals fee, and that you're going to go back and look at in terms of the numbers when we get those, but also the short term. But I realize it's kind of linked to the timing as well, of how fast the appeal can be done. And I guess when you come back with those numbers, to also have it linked to how fast it happens, because part of the concern, of course, is that people are going to use the appeal process because the timing is so important about when you get a license where, and someone else may just appeal your license so that they can get within the safety, within the buffer area to prevent you from getting in the buffer area. And I could see how the appeals could be used in a very detrimental way in that regard. But it wouldn't work so well if we had a very quick appeals process. And so the dollar value is linked to the timing of it, because if we had a quick appeals process, then less people would be likely to use it just to simply game the system, and then we wouldn't be able to lower that fee because we wouldn't have it across the board. If we had a longer term perspective, the incentive to appeal everything would be much stronger. So I don't know exactly how to do it, but I know you're going to go back after we go through this process and look at the dollars, so just to link it to the timing as well, if it costs more to have a quicker appeals process or that kind of thing. The random thought for the day.
All right. Anything else, members?
Nothing else.
All right. Then, members, I'd recommend that we instruct the CAO to report back to the Budget and Finance Committee next week on Monday with a fully detailed budget and staffing plan for DCR. Is there anything else, Mr. Williams, that we need to dispose of at this moment on this file? Or does that cover it?
There is the Cio report that's being referred to this committee. Would the committee like to consider and make a determination on that?
Can we simply advance that forward for consideration as part of the council file on Wednesday? And because it's incomplete until the 11th, so if it's necessary for consideration by the council on the 11th, I'd like not to interfere with that. But if we can do that in a way that's subject to the further report on the 11th, is there a way to do that?
Yes, we can. This committee can approve the CAO report, and then in council can make any determinations or motions.
Okay, so let's go ahead and approve the CAO report, refer that to council, and then instruct the CAO to further report back to this committee next week,
Okay.
as I had indicated.
And Mr. Chair,
Yes.
would the committee be advancing the recommendations by Councilmember Englander and Councilmember Blumenfeld. Councilmember Englander wanted report backs on Cio reporting back on all departments that are involved with cannabis and an analysis of anticipated costs for full recovery. Councilmember Englander also wanted to report back on LAPD, CID, fulfilling the role of review of safety and security plan.
Yes, and
also cost recovery.
And I had added to that CAO would do a comparative analysis between the cost effectiveness of CID doing that function as well as staffing up in DCR or another department. Yes?
And then also Councilmember Blumenfeld's request to report back on the appeal fee being linked to the timing of the appeal process.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, yeah, that should cover everything. Mr. Kress, did you have something else?
Where does that leave us on the Weezer amendment to reduce the cost to $100 for appeals fees?
So was that amendment a part of the CAO report? Or was it part of the ordinance? Because the ordinance is not before us.
The CAO report, because we were the ones that recommended the $4,000 for the appeal fee.
Okay. So we don't typically amend reports, so I'm a little confused about what the nature of that amendment would have been.
We could always not include it.
Yeah, I think why don't we say we'll approve the CAO report as it was submitted, and so if we have an A and a B report, council, then that's what we'll have. That makes sense.
Should we add that an updated review, I don't know if we want to make it part of the FSR, but at least a quarterly updated review on cost recovery come back to this committee as well?
I think we should do that separately. Let's not add more ornaments onto this tree right now.
Why are we approving the report instead of, it needs to be approved and those fees need to be locked in before we can move forward?
It's part of what will be voted on Wednesday. So in order not to disrupt that schedule, I'm fine moving it forward with the understanding that we're going to hear a more complete report on Monday. So in council on Wednesday, anything that we're not comfortable with regard to the fee schedule or the finances would be coming back here for consideration on the following Monday.
That's me. After it's already been approved the previous Wednesday.
The ordinance will be approved.
With the fees locked in.
Well, no, because that's a separate ordinance. The fee schedule is a separate ordinance.
But it actually makes more sense to do this way because we can actually start pinpointing how many licenses and square footage and facilities.
Because
that keeps
CAO
moving.
can't
That's a moving
really-
target, right?
Yeah.
And it changed this morning dramatically from where it was last week, which could change dramatically, who knows, to next week. So probably it makes sense to do that.
Rather than asking the CAO to go out and guess what the 8 things that we might choose to do are and then cost them out for us,
Right.
let's say, here's what we're planning to doing, how much will this cost? So, and then that will come back to this committee on the 11th.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Everybody good? Okay. Then without objection, everything we just said will be the action of the committee. Mr. Williams does an impeccable job of somehow keeping track of what we say. Okay, thank you all very much. That brings us to item number 12. Item number 12, and we have one card on this item. Jessica Meany, if you could come on up.
Item 12 is the Bureau of Engineering and Cio reports relative to the sidewalk repair program, including prioritization and scoring system, and the program's financing and delivery options.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Thank you, council members, and thank you, Councilmember Krikorian, for being one of our biggest sidewalk champions. We submitted a comment letter when this was at Public Works and Gang Reduction that hopefully you have.
We have it.
My biggest concerns is the pace of this program. When I talk to Bureau of Engineering staff, they estimate that it'll take more than the 5 years to get to all the city-adjacent facilities repair. And also, we're averaging about 20 access requests a year when BOE is seeing about 100 to 115 requests a month. I think that we will likely not get to residence repair for at least 7 to 10 years. Our Olympics are going to come and gone. We talk about our transportation revolution that's going on in the city, which I find quite exciting, but the sidewalk program is literally falling through the cracks. Given the resources they currently have right now, I don't think residents will see their sidewalks fixed for another 10 years. And I think we need to either address that or figure out a way to communicate that to the public. This exciting Fuse Fellow report that is coming before council pretty soon about our infrastructure in our city, our bids, our neighborhood councils, they all rate sidewalk repair as one of their most important issues on infrastructure, yet we currently are a little bit unresponsive on them. So thank you. And thank you to Julie Sauter, who's doing a great job at BOE too.
Thank you very much. Okay, engineering and CAO. Come on up. Good afternoon. Now,
Good afternoon.
I had recommended this for consent approval, but I know there were some questions by members. So if you can give a very just truncated report about, what's before us, and then we'll go right into the question.
So this is actually a report back requesting approval of a prioritization and scoring system, and this was directed by council. The scoring system is based on the requirements of the settlement as well as consideration directed by council. So we went ahead and we worked with our partners, our Department of Disability, BSS, as well as the council offices in developing the scoring system that achieved that goal, which is, again, incorporating the settlement requirements as well as criteria by the council office. So we're asking for approval of the scoring system. Once this is approved, we anticipate the programming, which a lot of it is going to be program-based, to be implemented within the 90 days. So that's a short and sweet.
All right. Very good. Mr. Kretz.
Well, I had one question, but I'll just ask another one first after the comments that we just heard. So are we only doing city-related sidewalks, or are we not also fixing some of the most problematic ones? I can say just from observation, what in my view is the worst sidewalk in the entire city, which happened to be 50 feet outside of my district and looked like a massive project, was actually complete, and it looks wonderful. And I don't believe it's a city facility. So I assume we are getting to some of the worst sidewalks, as well as just getting rid of our own obvious obligations, which are our own properties.
Currently, we are directed per the settlement to focus on city facilities, which you have seen, but also accessibility, disability, and those are requests that are being made by those in the disability community. So those are our two priorities, and currently those are the focus of our program.
And a 100-foot stretch that was somewhat volcanic and also made it difficult to get to a bus stop was taken care of. So I have observed a really bad spot. So we are, it's not just my imagination, we are doing a number of those that are the least accessible in the city as well.
Correct.
Okay. Now my original question, which is, I'm not entirely sure why we are favoring Vision Zero in relevant and irrelevant places. I've already objected to the fact that we are trying to direct more money towards street areas that are near Vision Zero, but may have absolutely nothing to do with the actual Vision Zero dangerous spots, but we've already decided to do that. This seems even less obvious. There's no clear connection to some bad sidewalks that may be near a bad Vision Zero intersection. It just seems like we're using every step possible to focus our resources on certain districts and provide no resources to others. So in fairness, I really don't see why we'd prioritize being within 500 feet of the high entry network when we're fixing sidewalks that may have absolutely nothing to do with the high entry network. And I would object to that and ask that that be removed as the criteria. And I'd like to know if there was any nexus at all to put it in, and certainly either way I would vote to remove it.
This is actually one of the items that we were asked to consider as part of the prioritization scoring system.
The Vision Zero and high entry network connections to sidewalk repair prioritization. I don't see any nexus at all to it. You may have been asked to consider it by someone, but I'm not sure that someone has ever given a justification other than asking for it. So if there is no justification, I would certainly ask that adding points for being near a sidewalk that's near a high entry network be removed as a criteria that gives any bonus points at all.
And just on another subject, unless I don't know if you're still on that subject.
No, as long as we at some point have a vote on that and hopefully remove it, since it seems to be, as far as I can tell, really the only irrelevant criteria that's listed.
I can kind of see a nexus, only because where the injuries that are resulting in the high injury network status are pedestrian related, as opposed to bicycle or car on car collision related, then you certainly want to encourage the ability of people to utilize the sidewalk in that area. And we've seen so many cases where people, because of the broken sidewalk, are forced to walk out into the roadway or do other things, or because they're disabled, they fall into the roadway. I hear what you're saying.
But there may also be no nexus at all, and nobody walking out into the roadway, but just a bad sidewalk.
Okay. So let's keep that open for discussion. Hear what other comments there are from the members.
So my other comment is why not look? Because it's going to take so long to catch up on this, as the speaker said earlier. We're so far behind already. Why not look at some kind of financing structure and bonding and doing more up front, because the Willits case didn't specify that it had to be general fund dollars anyway. We get much more mileage per year, put more people to work, and utilize some P3 availability as well. So we can create some public-private partnerships as well to do some of the work, working with our work source centers and others to employ those folks. Similar to what we were always talking about with doing in the SOS LA model, right? Which I know you guys were really helpful in putting that plan together, and I appreciate it. So we could take those same concepts, and instead of doing a minimal amount a year, we can really maximize it. Today's dollars certainly will go much further, both in labor costs and material. Has there been a proposal to, because we know we're set on Willits, how many years is it, 30?
It's a 30 years.
So we know we're set. We can do it all in 10 and just knock it out.
That won't work.
Well, whatever it might
We have to do it over 30 years.
No, we don't.
Yes, we do.
No, the settlement was very specific that if we completed the work before that, we could get court approval to be dismissed from that settlement.
We're not going to finish all the sidewalks before that.
Well, that's up to us.
Well,
I'm just saying,
Okay.
I think.
Go ahead.
Well, maybe we can do it over 29 years.
But I know.
Okay, so, but the point of that is, I think that is something we actually could look at, and I would like to entertain the idea of looking at bonding for it up front, having and if we need to, before we go through the exercise, go back to the court and find out. But I remember having this conversation in Budget and Finance in this committee, if we could do it sooner than what the court specified, And I think the answer we got back then was yes, we could, but these are the minimums. This is what the court will mandate that you have to do it by, but you can certainly come back to us. And so I know that conversation did come up. But in any event, if we could, I'm wondering why, or maybe this is the time to have that conversation.
If I may, Roy Cervantes with the Office of the CAO. The CAO report that's also attached to this council file was intended to be that initial report back to last year's direction from council to look at various options to accelerate the sidewalk repair program. Debt financing and a public-private partnership were among those options.
Right.
So recommendation number 3 of the report would instruct us to come back with any potential pilot arrangement. There's no specific pilot that's ready for proposal at this time, but those options are being considered, and we're discussing that with BOE and other departments as well in terms of how to possibly use that or any other option that was detailed in the CAO report to help accelerate that. So it's still being looked at, and part of the recommendation is to instruct our office to provide a more detailed report.
Great. What might be the time frame of putting some options together for that to come back to us with, whether we're looking at a 7-year, a 10-year, 15-year, even to cut it in half? What would be the, when could you come back with some of those options for us?
I'd have to get back to you on that. We're working with the Bureau of Engineering just to look at the numbers that were sort of discussed prior and discussing the feasibility of each of those options. But there have been initial discussions at this point. It's just nothing has come quite to that level to issue a formal proposal.
Would it be helpful to have a recommendation from this committee to report back on those options, flush them out and report back?
Recommendation 3 already recommends it, at least for the P3, but certainly if you wanted to add something for
an accelerated
other options,
program.
that can be done.
I think those recommendations have been in the works as part of the milieu. This is the scoring criteria is the only thing before us today, so I don't know if I want to add that.
Report. They talk about the options. It was actually part of
I'm going to clarify.
the
While you're looking at it, just were the recommendations that were made in Public Works incorporated into this?
Point of clarification, if I may, Lori Rittenberg, City Attorney. The settlement agreement actually says under term of settlement agreement, the settlement agreement shall expire 30 years after the date of the commencement of the compliance period. With the sole exception that the city must complete its reporting requirements after the compliance period under the district court's continuing jurisdiction. Nothing shall bar either party from moving for an extension. But there's nothing in here that says that we can complete before 30 years. Someone may have told you that, but that doesn't comply with the settlement agreement.
Yeah, okay.
But nothing says we can't.
Disagree. If we finish the work and all sidewalks are 100% accessible, if this settlement agreement provides that we continue to spend money that we don't need to spend on accessible sidewalks that are already accessible, then I'm going to have a real problem with that settlement.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay,
I really don't. There's a lot.
Okay, that's
there's a
not
lot.
a legal matter, so.
Well, that's not going to
but that's
happen.
not-
I really don't think so.
So, thank you. Okay, yes, Mr. Blumenfield.
That's great. In Public Works, we heard this, and there were some recommendations, I believe. Were any of those incorporated into this?
This is the original report that was submitted, so the actual report does not incorporate the recommendations or the report backs that were made for Public Works gang reduction. My understanding from the Public Works gang reduction meeting, the only report back that was requested of us was to look into a different sub-program, basically. We had talked about the access requests, which were requests made for those with the disability, the city facilities, and at the Public Works gang reduction, we were asked to look at report back, not as part of this report, but at some point in carving out a separate line item for a council-directed sub-program.
It was that, but I also thought we talked about 50-50 programs and those kinds of things in that. And, shared, trying to carve out some money for those incentive programs to stretch the dollars further.
Yeah, no, it was brought up for some options, a 50-50 program that BSS had reported on. but it was not incorporated into this scoring and prioritization report.
Well, so what would it take to incorporate some of that into the scoring?
It would be a separate report. There is a companion report, council file, that specifically deals with the funding option, and so we would be able to go back and look at that particular report to address the questions that came up at Public Works.
So if I, yeah, but it's attached to the same council file, so I'm sorry. So if I go back to the council file, there's actually, for what's agendized here on the sidewalk policy, the report back from the CAO, which was dated on December 16th, on the same council file, actually talks about the financing delivery options to accelerate the program and goes into looking at options for incentive programs to be extended. Let's see, that we can look at financing a debt service to maximize the use of the funds and get the work done faster, essentially. And spells out P3s and other options and opportunities. We've never, that I recall, have really ever examined that, and maybe a good time now. The recommendation back then was to ask to look at those, work with all the different agencies and put together party capital projects and create a financing mechanism to do all that. So I'm wondering if we could, under this agenda item, revisit that. And I know there's some discussion already, which I really appreciate it, but having sort of a time certain on that to come back and look at those options. And then in the meantime, while that's occurring, we could have legal conversations to find out what it would take, because I'm with the chair on this. I believe that that we would probably not have any issues, obstacles maybe, but no issues in resolving getting all the work done in a shorter amount of time. I don't know that, and it also substantially not only saves the city money from the increased costs for material and labor that keeps going up, but also the injuries and the liabilities.
Well, we can certainly have that report back to this committee from the CAO in consultation with the city attorney and have that come back to this committee. We can do that as an independent recommendation, separate from the three recommendations on this report. I think it's within the context of what we're talking about, but we'll, 60 days, something like that. 90 days? Tell me your comfort level.
Right, so I mean, I don't want to be, not give you an answer. It's just a lot of this funding option and alternatives would really be driven by working with the CAO.
Yeah.
As far as looking at funds available outside, with the general fund that we could dedicate towards the sidewalk repair program.
Yeah, and I think specifically, Mr. Englander's talking about considering the option of public-private partnerships and other bonding opportunities and those sorts of things. So
yes.
Pretty much everything that's spelled out in that.
Right, right. Yeah, but
why don't we
certainly rely on the CAO to.
Let's bring that discussion back in 60 days, and if it requires further discussion after that, that'd be understandable too. But I agree with you that I want to keep moving this ball forward and making sure that if the answer is no, it can't be done, then that's what the answer is. But we got to have resolution and continue to take one step after the other. Excuse the metaphor. Anything else, members, on this? Mr. Kretz. So back to the high injury network issue or anything else that
yes.
you have?
No, just still the high injury network. I'd like us to vote aye or nay on it. And frankly, if there's ever been any kind of an incident, that's already dealt with elsewhere as a reporting factor or as a point factor. So we would be talking about bad sidewalks that have never had an incident where there's never been any kind of an accident or an incident.
And I noticed that after I spoke, and I think you're right. It does seem to be sort of double counting for priority if something is already getting points because there are multiple incident reports. And then in addition to that, in fact, it's almost minimizing the actual incidents relative to the mere status of the high injury network. So if there's a high injury network location that has not had incidents, that would have a higher priority than a sidewalk that actually has had injuries. So that, you're right. I think that doesn't make a lot of sense in the scoring unless, if one of you want to
basically the scoring is
explain
that it's a cumulative, and so we take into, it's not a one or, it's a additive if you look at the scoring system. So you would get points, obviously the higher points will be attributed to those that were dictated by the settlement. And so the way the point system is structured is that that would be always given the lion's share of the total possible points. And for each criteria that that particular site may be in, if it's on a high injury network, then they get additional points. So it's basically a cumulative scoring system that each time you're on one of these criteria, you will get additional points. So it's not, one or the other.
No, I get it.
Right.
But the issue I think that Mr. Kretz is raising is if you're adding points because of high injury network proximity, then the incident reports become relatively less significant because otherwise it would have been priority under the settlement plus incident reports only, right? So the actual evidence of injury would be more important, a higher factor in this, if the high injury network proximity were excluded than if it were included. Is that not right?
I mean, I'd be perfectly happy to take the 15 points and add them into the other category where there were 1 to 4 reported incidents and 5 or more reported incidents, then go for the high injury network and protect areas where no one had ever even complained about it.
Agreed. Mr. Blumenfield, any thoughts on the matter?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand what the rationale was originally for it.
Yeah,
It was actually
this
one
was
of the
council-driven.
It was actually one of the items that the council asked us to include in part of the criteria. So specifically in the report back, it listed the items that they wanted us to score on.
Right, but it came to the council from the department probably. I don't think we made up these numbers.
No, we instructed them to provide priority points for high injury network. So they're just responding to what we asked them to do. This isn't a staff policy recommendation.
And the difference between a high injury network and an incident report.
Well, the high injury network may just be completely coincidental and has nothing to do with the sidewalk problem. But if no one's ever reported any problem with the sidewalk, why the proximity to the high injury network would get it a priority?
If the high injury network is because it's a bad intersection and people are getting killed.
But it's within 500 feet of a bad intersection and probably has nothing to do with it.
I'm trying to figure out the rationale for it. I don't know it. So that being said, I'm happy to support the motion.
So I would move that we remove that category and add the 15 points to 10 points for 5 or more reported incidents and 5 more points for 1 to 4 reported incidents. So it would be 20 and 10 instead of 10 and 5. So we wouldn't disrupt the overall math, but we would put it more to where it was actually needed.
Agreed. Mr. Bloomfield,
I'm okay with that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kretz.
Thank you.
Okay, so any other discussion on this item? With that one amendment then, I think that was the only thing we amended,
I think
right?
that was the only-
And then the instruction to bring the additional report back in 60 days, but that's just us. So with that, we'll go ahead and approve the recommendations in the report. Without objection, that will be the action of the committee. So thank you for your very good work on this. And as Ms. Meany said, we're all eager to get urgency and get rolling, but we're making progress. We are making progress. So thank you all very much for your continuing work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. That brings up, I think the only thing left on the agenda is general public comments. I'd like to invite up Ms. Yvonne Michelle Autry to come on up for your general public comment.
You only get 1 minute.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the city and the mayor for the money that was donated towards the development of the Skid Row Refresh Center, as I have been a member of the Skid Row Community Improvement Coalition. I wanted to speak relative to the settlement, I believe, regarding Waukesha Wilson as a black woman, a targeted individual. Not only are we defending the homeless people who are slated for extermination, I know about the rezoning. I would live in the street if it wasn't for God, because of the hidden cadre of, I believe, police officers, CIA that are commissioned to exterminate us. This woman was framed. I have been a victim of that same incrimination. Even as I speak, there is a neighbor of mine, I believe, undercover police officer, CIA, who is trying to incriminate me. And as I have been previously attacked, I've gone to the police, and they've reversed the culpability, claiming that I was 5150, which was not only what happened to Waukesha Wilson, Sandra Bland, Margaret Mitchell. This is not going to happen here for that record, right? Because you're liable, because this is a hidden agenda to exterminate black women and people of color that you do not want to look at.
Thank you.
Well, I'm still alive, so you're liable, and I'm going to keep speaking and exposing
Thank you.
that, so that we're defending
Thank
the
you.
people to get them out of the swag and police.
Thank you very much, Ms. Autry. Mr. Spindler's up, followed by Mr. Herman. Okay, Ms. Autry, please let the other speakers speak, please. Thank you. Mr. Spindler.
Yeah, so what do we see today? Complete confusion and chaos. You got your fingers in this, and you got your hands in this, and all of this. Your sidewalks were not fixed because the Department of Public Works kept returning the millions of dollars every year for road repairs. You took the money from the federal government, you put it into the general fund, you allocated it to Public Works, and Public Works returned it to you, but you forgot to return the unused federal money you stole back to the federal government. And that is a federal crime. Just like Jackie Lacey has a whole bunch of people getting exemptions on use taxes on gas, and they use their cars for personal use, so now they owe the federal government unpaid use taxes. This is a criminal organization, a criminal enterprise. You people don't know, but the end is coming for this bullshit.
Mr. Herman.
So Mr. Spindler's correct. You stole money from the federal government, promised to fix sidewalk and streets and all infrastructure regarding the Department of Disability. But in my complaint in regards to Paul Krikorian, for the record, as I submitted my DOJ complaint for denying me 30 seconds of continued general public comment, not multiple, general. And so now you're going to be investigated for crimes against people with disability, people with non-disabilities, people with invisible disabilities, so that way you could pay back the federal government all the fucking money you stole for infrastructure corrections. You fail as an Armenian, you fail as a fool who represents this budget and your council district in the 2nd district. So as an idiot, a moron, and a complete fool, now you're on record, jackass.
This meeting is adjourned.